I am not really one to endorse Cold Steel as a company, but they do have good viable products for a lot of people's uses. And there are people that I've known that wanted to get completely equipped on a budget, and I think one of the things I talk about in my tool videos, my workshop videos and everything, it's more important to be completely equipped than to have the best of something. And when you are trying to be completely equipped and do this on anything of a reasonable budget, there's certain compromises that you're going to make with cost and performance. And that's going to happen with hollow handle survival knives. And there's a certain tipping point on cost and performance which you may not want to cross. The thing is, with Cold Steel, you can get all the way down to the $20 range and not cross a tipping point of unacceptably bad performance for 20 bucks. And that's because Cold Steel has the Bushman series. They came out with, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. And this is one of the original Bushman knives. It had a very, very basic nylon sheath. It's made out of a high carbon sheet steel that was formed and bent and sharpened. Now, one of the things to understand about this, and it's the same with the kukri and the Spetsnaz shovels, Cold Steel's real claim to fame right now is this carbon steel sheet metal that's blade quality sheet metal, but it does rust. So these things, especially the newer models, are going to come packed in cosmetic. You got to keep them oiled or they'll rust. If they get a little rusty, you can still sharpen them. They still cut things. They still do their job just fine. And it's really not a major deal breaker. And these are not fine collector's items, although people like to get the older models and the newer models and compare them. So the Bushman is a budget survival knife that is very good utilitarian type stuff. It's a hollow handle survival knife, but unlike traditional hollow handle knives like this Chris Reeve design that was ripped off by Schrade, and very well ripped off by them, this one was pretty much, it's a storage compartment in the hollow handle and that's it. This one, because the hollow handle is a pass-through and it's tapered, you can put a broomstick on there, you can get a stick, a decent piece of hardwood or semi-flexible jungle wood, carve the edge of it with this knife and be able to insert that in there. And because this is a split handle, the harder you jam something in there, the more that spring tension is going to want to grip it. And so what happens is, this is a knife that can convert to a spear. And under those types of circumstances, and as inexpensive as they are, it doesn't hurt you to have more than one of these in your kit. One on your web gear, one on your pack, maybe even 3 of them or 4 of them. To have multiples of these is not a bad thing, because you can make one into a spear. You could maybe even use these on booby traps, although I'd recommend just making punji stakes or something if you're really so desperate you're making booby traps. But these are useful to have more than one. And when we look at some of the newer models, such as this one right here, the blades are pretty similar. This one had like a click-in mechanism on the sheath where you got to kind of bend this thing back. And it has like a little fire starter thing that comes with it. The sheath kind of resembles Clyde Kydex, but it's not. But you can see how it was a little tricky for me to get this out of the sheath, and that's because it actually locks into the sheath. So it's a usable sheath, especially under a survival circumstance where, you know, you weren't dressed for the occasion and you just need a knife on your belt and you're going to be using it a lot. This works, okay? This is functional. This one is a little bit more of a storage thing. It doesn't have much of a belt loop. The knife can fall out of it, and they've had some complaints that if it goes upside down, the knife falls right out. With this one, if you're actually doing field environment stuff, it is going to stay in the sheath. There's a little locking mechanism in there, and you heard that click, it's a retention sheath. So that's one of the big differences between the new and the old model, is that the new one comes with a cheap but very effective retention sheath. As far as your dimensions on your hollow handles, they actually are slightly different, and a newer model doesn't have the split in it. So that's where some people would prefer the older one that has a split in it, because this one, when you jam a piece of wood in there really hard, that split becomes your spring tension to hold that spear handle on there. Personal preference on that type of a thing. It's personal preference. because when you get these holes in here, you can run a nail or a screw or something in that, and then that's going to hold it, but it could still wobble a little bit. I kind of prefer the one with a split model. You know, personal preference either way. It's a little bit of a difference between a newer and the older model cold steel knives. Does that make the old ones worth anything because they're more classic? Personal preference again, because it's like a $10 flea market item, $20 item if you find new old stock someplace. On the newer model, there are people that preferred not to have the split. They thought if it's welded, it's more deluxe. You know, I don't know. I think you're making a good decision either way going with these and being on a budget. It's just that if you get your ego wrapped up in nicer stuff, you know, there's a Schrade Extreme Survival Knife. I personally like these. But you're not wrong to go inexpensive with a cold steel, especially with a survival kit, let's say, that lives in a vehicle, and it could be stolen. You know, you got to wager what's a broken window versus losing your bug out bag, or somebody prying open the trunk of your car versus losing a bug out bag. I'm not going to put a $600 Chris Reeve in a vehicle bug out bag, even on a military base. I mean, you know, some dickhead at the gate might say, okay, we're going to grab that. These things, I'm not going to say they're semi-disposable, but they're inexpensive, plentiful, easy to acquire, easy to replace, and pretty darn utilitarian.